Welcome back to Mental Health, where we talk about pop culture, social issues, and politics from a mental health viewpoint. Today I wanted to talk about an argument that I've heard come up a number of times, and I was listening to another podcast and it just made me start thinking more about the answer to this question that I find very interesting and hope others will as well. So when it comes to how things are right now, we should all be able to agree that there's a lot of discussion around victimology and victimhood. And the question has arisen of, first of all, people have talked about, some of these people, it seems like they are choosing to be victims and they're stating that they are victims and may even be lying about being victims. And so the question has come up of, why would anyone choose to do that? That doesn't make sense. Why would you choose to be part of an oppressed group or choose to be identified as somebody who has been victimized in some way? And so that is what I really wanted to focus on, as always, from sort of looking at this from a more mental health focused standpoint. Now, I want to say right off the bat, this is just me kind of making my musings relative to my own personal experience, mixed with my knowledge that I've developed over the years from schooling and from practice, and anecdotal evidence as well from both practice and my personal life. I'm also not saying at all that striving for a more balanced society is bad, or that things like power differentials and hierarchies and privilege, etc. don't exist or don't matter. I'm only making a point against this specific argument that there's no motivation to identify as a victim. So keep that in mind as I'm going through this. So before we even get to the question at hand per se, we have to kind of work our way up to it. And this all started with me hearing people talk again about the idea of economies. So if you've ever taken just like a Psych 100 class, you've probably heard of a token economy. So this is a classic approach that's been used in many research studies going way, way back, several decades. It's very much connected to operant conditioning, so conditioning people to be reinforced to do a certain behavior by getting something that they have placed value on for whatever reason. And so that's used as a reinforcer or a means to extinguish a certain behavior. So for instance, many of us probably got gold and colored stars in school for turning in assignments or helping out with certain activities. And this is an example of a token economy. We have learned to place value on those stars and see them as something that we want to get, and so therefore we will engage in certain behaviors to get those stars. The most obvious example, too, is money. Money on its own, what is it? It's just pieces of paper. It's technically worthless if we decide that it is, because on its own, it doesn't actually do anything. But we have determined that it's valuable because we trade it in order to get things that we want. So, ergo, that is a type of economy. That is the economy that we live in. And so the more capital we have in whatever economy that we're focused on, so in this case money, the more money we have, the more status and influence we gain. Same with the stars. The more stars we have, the more we're seen in the classroom by certain people. Some people may look at it and say, you're a goody two-shoes, but from the kind of well-behaved students and the teachers, you will be seen as having status and influence in your class as a positive peer. Now, what has value shifts over time, and new things come and go due to technology and innovations. But there's always been an inherent value in social connection. There's a lot of research out there, and I've talked about this many times referencing trauma. This is why neglect can be so damaging, because your social connection is being restrained. You're being confined, and simply the act of being in connection with others, communicating with others verbally, being physically touched in positive ways by others, being hugged, being told positive messages, all these things have a very positive impact on our system. So they are reinforcing more so directly. This isn't even really token based. But problems arise. Again, we start to tokenize these things as well. So think about the basic concept of popularity. It's a big thing, obviously, that comes up in school almost from the very beginning, but especially as you're moving into middle school and high school. How many friends you have is seen as another economy. That is a way to gain status and influence in school. And so this is just another number. It doesn't actually mean anything, but we're associating it with positive outcomes and positive things. So if you're bought into that economy, then you're going to seek to increase your own number of friends and also befriend people who already have high numbers. This all makes me think about this episode of Black Mirror. But before I jump the gun, that if you've seen that episode, you know what I'm getting at now. You may have already been thinking about it as well, because this idea of popularity has only been exacerbated by the dawn of social media. So now it's just not only how many friends do you have that you hang out with in the classroom or at lunch or, on the football field or whatever. Now it's been taken a step further in terms of friends lists, followers, subscribers, likes, clicks, whatever. I mean, this podcast is on some level bought into that idea. I'm always looking at ways to increase subscribers so that more people are clicking it, so that more people are hearing my message, to increase my status and influence. Now, I like to think that I'm doing that because I want more people to hear positive things that are going to help them live better lives. But I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't some aspect of it that was reinforcing for me as well. And the idea of just having my own voice heard and being seen as somebody worth listening to and potentially being able to attach ad revenue and all of that stuff makes me a part of this system. So I am a part of this economy. You are a part of this economy if you are listening right now. This is the new social capital. We are in what I've been seeing called an attention economy, where our status and influence and overall worth are determined by how much attention are we able to bring to ourselves or our channel or our podcast, or basically by various means to ourselves, so that we can kind of push ourselves higher up on the heap. And this happens at all levels. So you've got little kids engaging in this for at least bragging rights, so kind of the same idea behind basic old school popularity, if we can call it that now. But then also for young adults and adults, this increases their ability to sell merchandise. If you get your story trending and get all those views, you can monetize that. I talked about ad revenue, so there is money to be made. You've got high-ranking YouTubers. I've been talking about this a lot too, because I used to work with kids all the time where I'd ask them, what do you want to do with your future if you could do anything? And they'd all say they want to be NBA players, or they want to be rappers, they want to be musicians, they want to be celebrities. And that's what that used to mean, was you're usually either a musician or you're an athlete. And those were the big status markers to reach. But now I ask kids, what do they want to be? And almost all of them say, I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a YouTube star. And that's no joke. I mean, you've got people like Markiplier actually came to town, I want to say maybe a year ago or several months ago, and tickets were like $200 to go see this guy who just sits in front of a camera in his house and makes YouTube videos. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just the way things are. Culture has shifted once again. And now these kids, these young people are buying into this idea. They're very much a part of this economy and want that status. They want that influence. We are just naturally driven to want that level of attention. So we are all in this attention economy. We want the spotlight because there's a value to it. We're able to get various things that we want, and those can be many different things, but it is a means to an end in that way. So again, there's that Black Mirror episode, which is just so clever and well done. It also kind of terrifying because it does seem like the natural direction that these things could go, where not only do your likes and your followers increase your just inherent social status, but literally like you're only able to buy houses in certain areas or get in certain airlines, and whether you're first class or coach, what cars you can rent is all in this episode, the reality of the episode based on your social capital in this attention economy. And it was very interesting. I laughed, but also cried inside at the same time because I'm like, man, I could see things going that direction. And I don't think that's a good thing, but it didn't seem too unrealistic. So if all this that I'm saying kind of makes sense to you, and we can agree that we're in this attention economy together, then let's go back to the next natural question, which is, okay, how do I grab the spotlight then? How do I get that attention so that I can increase my numbers, so that I can increase my capital in this attention economy? And this is exactly why we've got terms now like clickbait. This is a big thing. People have figured out different things that they can put in their thumbnail image or in their title. Across the board, this could be a YouTube video, this could be a news story, whatever. That is going to increase the odds that eyes are going to look at that. This is why sexual content is still like one of the number one consumed things on the internet. Is very eye-grabbing. And that's what people want, things that are very eye-catching. We tend to, as human beings, zero in on things that evoke very strong feelings and reactions. And unfortunately, and I've talked about this before, we tend to focus more on the negative than the positive. Things that increase negative emotions tend to take up more of our attention. And the theory or hypothesis around that is largely that that's a survival mechanism, that historically things that evoked, especially things like fear and anxiety, tended to be things that were life-threatening. So it made sense from an evolutionary standpoint to pay attention more to things that are evoking negative emotions in order to survive. But this seems to have kind of lingered around in our systems, as we've only been around for so long. And thus we see the rise of what people call outrage culture, because they know that if they can post a headline or a picture or something that people are going to see and go, oh my God, I can't believe that. And whether it's in agreement or disagreement, it's a great way to capture a very large audience, because now you're catching people from all sides of it. You don't have to post an argument and hope that the people who agree with you are clicking on it. You've got people who agree and disagree clicking on it because, again, you've caught their attention, and people are either clicking on it ready to feel vindicated or be completely outraged by what's going on. So this is a simplification, of course, of a very complex issue. Again, I know that, I'm just one person. This is just me spouting off a very kind of small piece of this argument from just the, in the broad scale of things, the limited knowledge and information that I have. But I still consider this to be a big factor in how outrage culture has developed, because this outrage leads to clicks lead to shares, that leads to visibility and trending. And at that point, once you've got that social capital, you can cash that in for money or leverage it for deals to get more programming, get onto a bigger network, what have you. Like, there's a lot of value in there. And so let's take it another step forward. So how do we generate outrage then? What's a really great way to generate outrage? Well, once we start talking about victimhood, so now we're finally getting back to that original argument. If we're talking about victimhood, oftentimes pointing out how something is oppressive, and the more novel, the better. I was going to use the word ridiculous, but I like the word novel better. I think that's more neutral and fair, because not all these things are necessarily ridiculous. There's often some truth to some of these things. Again, I'm not saying it's not worth talking about these issues and challenging issues. In fact, I welcome that. But again, the argument was, why would you claim victimhood? Nobody would choose to be a victim. So here we are, though. The more novel, the better in terms of talking about how something is oppressive, and that is going to generate that outrage. So here we have victimhood becoming a sort of currency because it leads to that attention in this attention economy where attention means everything, and that leads to any number of other positive reinforcers. So by stating that either some terrible thing has happened to you or that you are part of this oppressed minority group, that is going to generate attention because that's and it's grown too because that's kind of become sort of the zeitgeist. Like it's blown up to the point that this is at the forefront of everyone's mind and people are interested in talking about it, which on some level is a good thing, but unfortunately it often just degenerates into arguing and talking about who's more victimized and who's better and who's worse and what needs to be done, and sometimes even provoking people to, make poor decisions and become violent and whatnot. And so that aspect of it is not good. And that's what I try to avoid with this podcast is I don't want to push people in any particular direction. I just want to talk about what I'm seeing, the trend, and then hopefully utilizing some of the techniques and strategies and ways of looking at things from a more objective viewpoint. And we're all human, so none of us can be 100% objective. That's why I get annoyed when I see newspapers and various people and companies trying to say that they're completely objective. That's just impossible. Nobody's completely objective. I try to, pitch this podcast as being pretty nonpartisan and centrist and neutral, but the fact of the matter is I have opinions on these things and I swing different directions on different issues, and so I'm not going to pretend that this is a completely unbiased thing. I have my own biases. But getting back to my main point is that somewhat counterintuitively, nowadays, claiming victimhood actually generates power. If you hit trending on YouTube, and you're on that front page, you are in effect gaining influence over a moment in culture. You have got the eyes on you. You have increased your capability for your voice and your message to get out there. You've got more eyes on you. You got more ears listening to you. That means more potential subscribers, people who are going to follow you more. That could lead to more, again, things like ad revenue or other social capital of some kind. We see when these messages pop up, GoFundMes are often not far behind too. Often not even generated by the actual person, and Patreons as well. But people will start up if they see a cause that they see as valuable. So like, perfect example right now. And again, I'm not saying I agree with this or I don't agree with this. I'm just pointing it out as an example. This person was really impassioned by the idea of building a wall. I believe it was a veteran. And so they decided to create a GoFundMe page for the wall. And enough people saw that and got behind it that it hit trending in the news cycle. And now everybody's talking about it, which has put more eyes on it, which have led more people to that GoFundMe page, which means more people have been contributing actual money. And last I checked, they're at like $7 million or something like that. Probably far past that at this point. And again, I'm not saying whether or not that's a good or bad thing. I'm just simply pointing it out as an example here. That's less of a victimhood stance, though. So maybe that's not the greatest example. But you'll see, also with the whole Brett Kavanaugh thing that happened, multiple GoFundMes pop up in the wake of wanting to support this person that they saw as a victim. And clearly something had happened to that poor person. I've talked before, I believe, about memory and how our memories are extremely flawed, and why I don't look at memory as great evidence of wrongdoing, because We tend to remember things very inaccurately. Our brain just likes to fill in the gaps with all sorts of information. So I think just based on that person's affect and their presentation, it seemed pretty clear that they had been involved in some sort of trauma in their life, but it was impossible to truly deduce exactly what that was. But that's another point for another day. My point right now is that this person became the trending news story, and then they created GoFundMes to generate money to support this person. And so there you go again. I could go on all day with examples of this, but again, it's this interesting, somewhat ironic thing where now claiming victimhood can generate you influence and power and potential to have any number of opportunities come your way. I mean, you can end up getting then interviewed on big news stations or on talk shows or late night shows, which gives you even more exposure, which opens up even more opportunities and more followers, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And so the discussion being pushed is now that being a part of a historically, and in some cases currently, oppressed minority group is inherently better. Like, that makes you a better person in some way than being part of this larger privileged group because, hey, you've had everything handed to you, and so you're kind of a bad person at base, and we're morally, at least, better. So it's sort of being made into this fashion, which is something that irks me about it. And I see this, especially with young people I work with. I see people using it as a fashion, which is very frustrating to me. And I've had conversations with people from, say, the LGBTQ community about how that's kind of frustrating to them too, because they feel like they've got this true thing that they're working with that's a core part of their identity that they're very proud of, that they want to help other people with. And now you've got people coming in, and especially young people, kind of appropriating that as sort of a fashion because now it's being made sort of en vogue. And again, that goes to the question of, well, why would a young person choose to say that they're gay or say that they're trans or say that they're black when really their skin is white? I mean, we've seen examples of all these things. And the answer, again, is social capital, especially with young people. So going back to what I was saying about YouTubers and being willing to pay $200 to go see a touring YouTuber do a brief conference in your area, young people see value in being able to be in the spotlight and having a large number of followers and a large number of subscribers. And what they're seeing right now, and even more so filtered through a lens of somebody whose brain is not fully developed to truly comprehend all the complex pieces of this issue, they're often seeing the message that it's better to identify in one of these kind of, I hate the word special because that can sound really patronizing, but that's kind of how it's seen by some of these people, is they want to be special. They want to have that attention and be in the spotlight and be different and maybe even a little bit counterculture. That's always been a thing too, but a lot of them, and not all of them, absolutely. I've worked with plenty of young people who do fall into these communities, and that needs to be a big part of the work that we do with them to support them in that. But a lot of them are just using it as a fashion. It's just the new jacket to wear, the new fancy shirt with the logo on it that allows them to feel like they're getting out in the spotlight and getting that attention and falling in with a group that's going to gain them some sort of social status. We also see adults doing this too. This is, I think, a big part too of why DNA testing has totally taken off with things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com and things of that nature. People are interested in that because some of them just want to know where they come from, but some of these people too, like, genuinely want to be able to prove that, for instance, they're not all white, that they come from these other more kind of en vogue backgrounds right now, so that they can claim a piece of that victimhood and feel like they are involved and that they can be included in sort of the good people group. And again, I'm making very broad stroke generalizations here. But I'm just giving examples, and we've all heard examples of this too. So I'm not saying this is everyone, but I just see it playing out. But they want in. They want to be a part of it. And while there's still plenty of avenues in day-to-day where people who are part of these smaller minority groups will still face some form or another of discrimination on the street or in certain areas or with certain people, their social capital online is still affording them many privileges. And that's something I find kind of amusing about all this, is that you've got it's like the more you play into it, the more you kind of can't anymore. You can't claim that status anymore. It's like nobody's looking at Jay-Z and saying that Jay-Z is like, oh, poor Jay-Z, he's had it so bad. Back in the day he did, like where he came up from. I have respect for some aspects of it. Not all of it was great, but some of that could be considered societal. But in any case, there was a time in Jay-Z's life where rapping about his tough life situation meant something and got eyes on him and afforded him over time this social capital. But now he's got so much social capital accrued, so many followers, so many fans, playing big venues, making millions of dollars on shows and record deals and fashion lines and whatever else he's doing now, that people now kind of mock him when he goes into these conversations, because it's like, man, who are you? Like you've got it better off than anyone. So it's an interesting phenomenon, and I'm wondering how this is going to play out with some of these people who are sort of newer to the fold in terms of social media celebrities and where this is all going to go to. So again, I'm not saying whether or not this is all a bad thing or if it's a good thing. I don't really think it can even necessarily be defined in those terms as a whole, because again, it's complex. I'm only taking on a small, probably ultimately minuscule little piece of the issue on. But some of it's probably good and some of it's probably bad. Like I could see some good in how this is affording another platform for genuinely good people who want to do good, getting deserved recognition for their hard work and for trying to help the people around them, hopefully in productive ways. But then I also see other aspects of it that could be very negative and have poor repercussions on society. There's the simple addictive nature of it, anything that is kind of tokenized, and we're seeing this already with people leaving Facebook and leaving Twitter and recognizing that they're spending an unhealthy amount of time having anxiety about how many followers they have and how many likes they have and who's reading their posts. So I don't think that's good for people's mental health. And then also, any economy you have, there's the potential to create a kind of more cutthroat side of it, on par with what we stereotypically think of like Wall Street culture. People lie and cheat to get ahead in any economy. It doesn't matter what it is. If there's social capital to be had, and if that social capital right now is attention, people will lie and cheat to get attention, because again, there is an inherent incentive available there. So to the question again of why would somebody claim that they're a victim or choose to be a victim or identify with a victimized or oppressed group, because in their mind, the logic is, well, you're basically taking yourself down a rung. Why would you include yourself in something that's disempowering you? The answer, again, is that it's ironically kind of the opposite. At this point, with the rise of social media and these attention economies, and also just the public eye being very much on kind of race and gender and sexuality and all these different aspects of identity, there has arisen this incentive to identify with certain groups for various ways of getting value. And that could be money, that could be just the thrill of having so many people's ears listening to you. It could be any number of things, but there's definitely an incentive there. And we've seen story after story where we find out that some people, unfortunately, are lying. People do make things up, and people do overplay their hand and think that something's going to help them. Like we had the whole Elizabeth Warren situation where she was trying so hard to identify with, what was it, Cherokee background. And in doing so, I just couldn't help watching that and just being like, this just feels like I think you're doing a good thing, but it felt very wrong to me. It felt very counterintuitive because it felt again like, it feels like you're not trying to elevate the Cherokee culture. You're trying to elevate your own status with your constituents, and especially with minority constituents, by saying, hey, I'm part of an oppressed group too. And so just using the Cherokee culture to elevate herself, which I feel like that's a big reason why the somebody from the Cherokee Nation made that whole post about how, like, we're not going to formally recognize her and this is not how things are done. And I think they picked up on that too, where they were feeling like, you're just using us. This doesn't feel right. Like, you're not doing the right thing. I think in Elizabeth Warren's mind, she was doing the right thing. I think she had good intentions, but I think, again, just the zeitgeist and these economies that I've been talking about, and also her bitterness with Trump, obviously all kind of played into making some very poor decisions. As I've said many times before, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so I'm very much against people who say, this sounds like a good idea, let's roll with it. I'm very much of, okay, that sounds like it could be a good idea. Let's talk about that. Let's like really dig into this and see, where does this lead to and where does it get us? And if it leads us to a good place, then yeah, let's roll with it. But oftentimes things have been pushed before that sound good, but in practice can not be helpful. And often they can even be damaging and cause harm to a group or society at large. So also examples of, unfortunately, people lying about being sexually assaulted. And I know I just mentioned the Kavanaugh hearings earlier. I'm not talking about that. I do not think that Blasey Ford was her name. I don't think she was lying. Again, I think she genuinely believed what she was saying. My only issue with that whole thing was mainly around the psychological construct of what we know about memory and how it's flawed, and how it's hard for me to take a stance against someone just based on what's ultimately circumstantial evidence. So I'm not alluding to her, but there have been other cases where it's been proven, especially like college cases, where somebody claimed that they had been sexually assaulted, and then it came out with beyond a reasonable doubt that had not happened. And unfortunately, these people's identities and their own status was probably permanently harmed and scarred by this, even though it wasn't true. There was even a really highly publicized one where somebody had claimed that they had been like gang raped by like a fraternity, and the story was just all over the news. But it ultimately was retracted later on because they found evidence that this was made up. I think the person even admitted that they made the story up, probably in part due to these reasons. It was a way to potentially gain some social and potentially financial capital in the process, which is such a bummer and something that we don't like to think about. But I find that very insulting as a mental health professional who works with real life sexual assault and rape victims all the time. I've worked with dozens of them, largely male victims, and these people have stories and they have such high needs and they've been through so much and they need to be acknowledged. And so for people to trivialize a very real issue by making up stories is very frustrating for me, to say the least. But the stories are out there. You can look them up. I mean, if you just Google, falsified sexual assault story, especially on college campuses, they happen all the time. And the retraction is always just a footnote. I've been talking to people regularly lately about like, hey, you remember that story about the fraternity gang rape? And everybody remembers the story, and everyone remembers that they were guilty. And then I have to say, like, well, let me show you this. And I pull up the retraction, and almost nobody heard that story. And that's not good. So that's the not good aspect of this. I think people are being, just like I said, in any economy, there's people who are going to want to get involved with the system without putting in the work and doing the good parts of it, and just lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead with that social capital. So that's the problem with that. But overall, again, I think there are good aspects of this. I love how interested people are in this, especially young people. I hear younger and younger people talking about this stuff in a very often surprisingly intelligent way. Not to say young people aren't intelligent, but I definitely, when I was growing up, I didn't hear a lot of 15, 16-year-olds pontificating about big social issues. They were more talking about, what they were going to do next season for a sport, or what they were going to do on summer vacation. So more conversation is good. And I'm hoping that this ultimately, we can kind of figure out what works and weed out what doesn't, and allow this to be a bridge to something better. But we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully, again, this was interesting to you. Speaking of social capital, if you enjoy this podcast and this is your first time listening, please do hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, give us a rating, share this on your own social media and with people you know. And again, I'm trying to get the message out there. And yes, of course, there's probably that piece of me too. There's definitely that piece of me too that likes to hear my own voice on recording and know people are listening. So no lies there. But again, thank you as always for listening. And as the two wise sages, Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan say, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.